morning rush at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport was as chaotic as ever. Travelers shuffled through security lines, their eyes heavy with sleep but their minds focused on reaching their destinations. The buzz of conversations, the shuffle of luggage wheels, and the clatter of coffee cups created a familiar symphony of early morning travel. Among the crowd was Vanessa, a sharply dressed woman in her late 30s. Her navy blazer and sleek heels exuded confidence, and her perfectly styled hair and designer handbag completed the picture of success. As a senior marketing executive at a major firm, Vanessa was accustomed to first-class privileges. To her, first class wasn't just a perk. It was a status symbol, a reminder of how far she'd climbed the corporate ladder. She approached the first-class boarding area with the confidence of someone who believed they belonged there. Vanessa glanced around at the other passengers, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She liked to think she could tell at a glance who deserved to be in first class and who didn't. Her gaze landed on an older man standing near the back of the first-class boarding group. He was dressed in a simple cardigan over a button-down shirt, paired with worn loafers and a small, battered leather satchel slung over one shoulder. His silver hair framed a kind, weathered face, but his casual attire stood out in sharp contrast to the polished appearance of the other passengers. Vanessa's lips curled into a slight smirk. First class isn't what it used to be, she thought, shaking her head. She returned her attention to her phone, but the sight of the man lingered in her mind. When the boarding call for first class came, Vanessa strode confidently to the gate. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step a reminder of her status. She quickly settled into her seat near the front of the plane, arranging her designer bag carefully in the overhead bin before pulling out her tablet. Vanessa was already immersed in emails by the time other passengers began filing in, but she couldn't resist glancing up when the older man entered the cabin. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, with an air of calm that seemed to contrast sharply with the hurried pace of the other travelers. He exchanged a polite nod with the flight attendant as he walked past her. Vanessa watched as he approached the seat directly across the aisle from hers. He placed his satchel under the seat in front of him and leaned back with a quiet sigh, gazing out the window with a serene expression. Vanessa's brow furrowed slightly. How did he end up here, she wondered. To her, first class was reserved for the elite, for those who had earned their place at the top. This man, with his casual attire and quiet demeanor, didn't fit her image of a first-class passenger. Unable to contain her curiosity, Vanessa leaned toward the flight attendant as she passed by. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but pointed. "Are we allowing upgrades from coach now?" The flight attendant hesitated for a moment, her professional smile faltering before she replied, "No, ma'am. All passengers in first class are ticketed here." Vanessa leaned back in her seat, her smirk returning. She cast another glance at the man across the aisle, shaking her head slightly. I guess standards aren't what they used to be, she thought. As the plane began to taxi, Vanessa tried to focus on her work, but she found her attention drifting back to the man. He sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on the window. There was something about his calmness that irritated her. To Vanessa, first class was about making a statement, about asserting one's place at the top. Yet this man seemed entirely uninterested in asserting anything. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. Passengers sipped their drinks, flipped through magazines, or worked on their laptops. Vanessa couldn't resist sneaking another glance at the man across the aisle. Finally, she leaned slightly into the aisle and spoke. "Long day ahead?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with condescension. The man turned to her, his expression kind but unreadable. "Always an adventure," he replied simply. Vanessa tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "Let me guess," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "A last-minute upgrade? Or maybe cashing in some miles?" The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, just heading to New York," he said, his tone as calm as ever. Vanessa leaned back, feeling a flicker of irritation at his refusal to engage with her provocations. She sipped her sparkling water, her eyes darting back to the man occasionally. There was something about his demeanor, his unshakable calmness, that gnawed at her. When the flight attendant approached with the beverage cart, Vanessa watched as the man ordered a cup of coffee. The attendant handed him the steaming cup with a warm smile. "Here you go, Mr. Hanks," she said. Vanessa froze, her glass of water halfway to her lips. "Hanks?" Her eyes darted back to the man, her heart pounding as recognition dawned. The kind eyes, the warm smile, the unmistakable voice. It was him, Tom Hanks. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin as other passengers caught on. "Is that really Tom Hanks?" one woman murmured to her seatmate. "I think it is," another passenger whispered excitedly. Vanessa's face burned with embarrassment. She slumped slightly in her seat, replaying every word she had said to him in her mind. The condescension, the assumptions, it all felt unbearably foolish now. Tom Hanks, meanwhile, seemed entirely unbothered. He sipped his coffee and gazed out the window, his calm demeanor unchanged. His lack of reaction only made Vanessa feel worse. Vanessa sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing. Tom Hanks, she thought, her stomach tightening with dread. She replayed every word she had said to him, every smirk, every condescending remark. She had mocked Tom Hanks, one of the most beloved actors in the world, a man known for his kindness, humility, and countless iconic roles. The whispers in the cabin grew louder as more passengers recognized him. "Is it really him?" a man behind her murmured. "Oh my gosh, it is," his companion replied. "It's Tom Hanks." Vanessa's face burned with shame. She slumped lower in her seat, wishing she could disappear. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a sinking feeling of regret. How could she have been so blind? Tom Hanks, meanwhile, remained unfazed. He sipped his coffee, gazing out the window as if the murmurs and stolen glances didn't exist. His calm, composed demeanor only made Vanessa feel worse. She considered saying something, an apology, an explanation, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say to make up for the way she had treated him? She stared down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. The rest of the flight passed in excruciating silence for Vanessa. She couldn't bring herself to meet Hanks's gaze, and yet she couldn't stop thinking about him. How had he remained so composed, so unaffected by her rude comments? As the plane began its descent, Vanessa knew she couldn't let the flight end without saying something. Her embarrassment was overwhelming, but she realized that the only way to move forward was to own up to her behavior. When the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began gathering their belongings, Vanessa hesitated for a moment before leaning slightly into the aisle. "Mr. Hanks," she said softly, her voice trembling. Tom Hanks turned to her, his expression kind but curious. "Yes?" Vanessa swallowed hard, her cheeks flushing. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't realize who you were, and I said some things that were completely out of line. It was rude, and I feel awful about it." Hanks regarded her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. A warm, genuine smile that seemed to melt some of her tension. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "But let me ask you something. If I weren't who you think I am, would that make the way you spoke to me okay?" Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the question. She opened her mouth to respond but found herself at a loss for words. The truth was painfully clear. She had judged him based on appearances, assuming he didn't belong in her world. Hanks nodded, his expression kind but firm. "It's not about who the other person is," he said. "It's about who you are." Vanessa felt her face flush with shame. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're right," she said. "I have a lot to think about." Hanks gave her a small, reassuring smile before turning back to retrieve his satchel. The conversation was over, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. As the passengers disembarked, Vanessa watched as Tom Hanks walked through the terminal, blending effortlessly into the crowd. He didn't seek attention or demand respect. It was simply given to him because of who he was, not just as an actor, but as a person. Vanessa walked toward baggage claim in a daze. She couldn't stop thinking about the encounter, about the quiet grace and humility Hanks had shown in the face of her arrogance. She realized how often she had judged people, colleagues, strangers, even friends, based on appearances or assumptions. For the first time in years, she felt a pang of humility. She resolved to change, to be more mindful of how she treated others, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. As she left the airport and stepped into the bright Arizona sun, Vanessa felt a strange mix of shame and hope. The encounter had humbled her, but it had also given her a chance to grow. Sometimes she realized the most important lessons come not from lectures or books, but from quiet moments with people who hold up a mirror and force you to confront who you really are. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to grow. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Let us know in the comments below.